Hello, fellow cyborgs. There are many reasons you should not like Villette, the principal one being expecting Jane Eyre from it. That's pretty much my thesis for this review video, but before I get any further, book haiku. Ugly and honest, I pretend I don't know you. I'm not Jane Eyre. So I had a very interesting reading experience with Villette. When I first started reading it, I was very pleased to be starting another Charlotte Bronte. I've only ever read Jane Eyre besides this one, but then I found it harder and harder to just get into it, and eventually I downloaded all the things. I downloaded the ebook and an audiobook, and I had this physical copy just desperate to read it. It was the assigned reading from my private book club, and I also had a group buddy read going, which kind of fell apart. Acacia Ives is the only other one who ended up reading this with me, and she read it way ahead of me. But in any case, I needed to get this read, and so I ended up listening to the audiobook on 2x speed while following along with the print copy, and that's how I got through this. And I use that language because this wasn't a very fun sort of reading experience. I really had to just force my butt to sit down and get through a couple of chapters of Villette. It wasn't until maybe halfway through the book that I started feeling anything for any of the characters. And so knowing that, you're probably very confused, having already heard me mention in a few videos that I gave this a peremptory 5 stars. At the end of reading Villette, I would have to say that my first reading experience of Villette was about a 3-star enjoyment level. But after I finished Villette, I went back to the beginning and read the introduction, which is included in my copy. And this introduction made me completely rethink everything that I had experienced up until this point, and made me cry, actually, on a couple occasions. Mallory Ortberg even starts her introduction saying, we need to get the elephant out of the room, which is Jane Eyre, and we need to talk about why Lucy Snow, who is the protagonist of Villette, is never going to be Jane Eyre, and if you're expecting Jane in this Villette, you're going to be deeply disappointed. Linked down below is a video I made where I read aloud Mallory Ortberg's introduction so that everyone can get a copy of it without having to buy this specific edition or try to find the introduction somewhere online. So please listen to that. I recommend listening to it after reading Villette because that's how it impacted me most, but it does not have any major spoilers, and I don't think it would ruin your reading experience of Villette if you listen to it before giving it a go. So here are some things that you are not going to expect in Villette that you're going to get in Jane Eyre. One of the main perks for Kate Howe, at least in Jane Eyre, was Bronte's writing about nature. Villette takes place in a city. You're not going to get very many descriptions of nature because there isn't a lot around Lucy. In Jane Eyre, you understand her to her core at the end of the first chapter. At the end of the first chapter of Villette, you don't even know the protagonist's name yet. The first 3 chapters of Villette are focused on describing the life of this small girl, Paulina, who has recently moved into the household that Lucy Snow is living in. It's a really weird place to start an autobiographical novel if Lucy Snow was writing it. But having finished it, it's completely appropriate. Lucy is a character who does not want to be understood by the reader. She's not out to charm the reader. She's not out to be friends with the reader. Lucy Snow is focused on surviving and self-preservation. She's completely unapologetic by that, and this whole journey of reading Villette is Lucy Snow kind of begrudgingly telling you about her life, almost from the perspective that you kept pestering her about it, and so she just finally gave in to just shut you up, but she's not here to tell a story she's excited to tell. Let me read you a quick passage from the introduction. It's my favorite paragraph of the introduction. Forget the modern debate over likable female characters. Lucy is prickly, repressed, untrustworthy, unattractive, judgmental, in constant denial of her own feelings, desperate for affection, violently anti-Catholic. In short, an impossible female character. There are even times when not only Lucy, but Bronte herself hides significant information about other characters from readers, often casually mentioning having withheld it long after the fact. She is difficult to sympathize with because she does not seek to be understood, not by us nor by anyone else. She seeks always to appear smaller, not because she enjoys being ignored, because she has found being human-sized altogether too painful to endure. She has no hope of the power of pleasing, but this does not mean she has stopped wishing that she had it. Lucy is a completely different character than Jane Eyre. Though superficially they may seem very similar, they're both plain, they're both small, they're both orphans, they both have to make their own way in the world, and they do so as governesses. That's about where the main comparison really ends. Jane is kind and passionate and forgiving and needs human affection to survive. Lucy Snow would like human affection, she would like to be loved, but she never really lets herself believe in this hope. She never lets herself really hope this. For Lucy, she just needs the bare minimum: food, roof over her head, and money to survive on. That's all she needs from this world. She doesn't really let herself believe in anything greater because she doesn't think that she'd be able to survive the heartbreak of not getting it. By the end of Villette, I realized that between Jane Eyre and Lucy Snow, who are fairly similar sorts of people, and as curmudgeonly perhaps, and as less lovable as Lucy is to Jane, I realized that for the most part and for the majority of my life and how I think my life is going to turn out, I'm probably a lot more like Lucy than I'll ever be like Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre is a wonderful protagonist for a fictional novel that has romance and adventure and thrills and eventually a happy ending, but Lucy is a real person. And I think that there are depths of truth to be found in Villette that really can't be found in the romance and the fantasy of Jane Eyre. So I know I've only talked to you about how Lucy Snow is not like Jane Eyre. Before I go, I'll just give you a brief plot synopsis, or at least an introduction to the plot. So this starts out with Lucy being 10 years old or so, and she's staying with her godmother, the Bretons. Eventually, when she becomes a young woman, she travels to Belgium and ends up in the town of Villette, and ends up as a school teacher in a boarding school and day school. Another challenge that Villette has is that there's quite a lot of dialogue in French, quite a lot. In Jane, there's maybe 4 instances of French. In Villette, if you don't have a relative standard knowledge of French, you're not going to be able to get at what the sentences mean, but I don't think that it would completely impair your reading of the dialogue. The responses in English will make you be able to understand what's going on. Sorry guys, the light's changing and putting doohickeys on the book in my face, so I'm just gonna wrap this up real quick. If you don't know any French, Google Translate is a thing, and also I think you'll be able to understand the conversations, the gists of them. Nothing super important happens in these dialogues, and if you think you're missing something, then Google Translate will give you a pretty good idea of what this is. So this is then just Lucy Snow's life in this school, and building relationships and not building relationships, and just being her melancholy self. There is really no front flap back blurb charm to Villette, but I think it has a lot more heart and soul than Jane does, just because of how realistic it is. This is a much more depressing book. You could argue that Lucy Snow suffers from depression for the majority of this, so just know that if you are going to go into Villette, that you are not going to get Jane, you're not going to get Mr. Rochester, you're not going to get the adventure and the romance. You are going to get a very realistic story that probably happened to hundreds of thousands of women who were abandoned and of a upper working class station in the Victorian era. Not everyone's life ends in a happy ending. Not everyone gets the guy and the house and the fortune, and that doesn't mean that their stories aren't as, or perhaps more important to be told. Lucy Snow doesn't ask this of you, but I'm going to ask this of you, to just listen to Lucy Snow for a while. See if you can find any part of yourself within her and her experiences and her hesitation and her self-protection. If you do, then you should probably carry on, because Lucy Snow is someone who doesn't ask or want to be understood, but by trying to understand her, you can understand a lot more about yourself, and I think you can find a companion to be part of your life for the rest of it. Thank you for watching that long-awaited review of Villette. I hope that you check out the introduction link that I have down below. I hope that you also really think about checking out Lucy Snow and Villette and giving it a try, knowing that it's not going to be doing the same things that Jane Eyre is doing. If you have any other underloved classics from perhaps well-known Victorian authors, I'd love to hear about them. And if you have read Villette, I'd love to chat with you about it in the comment section below. If you could just put a spoiler hat on it, just let someone know that you're going to be talking about major plot points in there, then everything will be fine. Until next time, I hope that you find yourself a new literary companion and continue to be lovely. And thank you, patrons, as always, for patroning, being a Thank you for being a part of this channel and for supporting it and myself. I hope that you perhaps consider picking up Villette and enjoy it when you get to the end and have to think about it as much as I did. But in any case, and until then, I hope that you have a lovely day.